Hello, welcome to Saturday's edition of Cracking the Cryptic, or one of Saturday's editions of Cracking the Cryptic. Today, this is going to be a video I've been wanting to make for a couple of weeks. It really is a special video because it allows me really to show you something that I find truly remarkable. Those of you who follow the channel will know that I'm a massive, I'm a puzzle nut, frankly, and it's quite rare for me to get the opportunity to watch other puzzlers solving. And the Japanese Heads-Up Puzzle Championship has been going on now for a while, and Ryotaro Chiba has been emailing me, telling me about some of the puzzles and some of the sort of competition that's been going on in that tournament. And he's been kind enough to share with me his thought processes as he solved the puzzle on the screen. So I have video footage of him solving this puzzle, competing against Endo, no less. And Ryotaro's thought process as he goes through, we are going to get to hear it. And this is going to be something else. So what I'm going to do in a minute is I'm going to tell you about how the rules of this puzzle work. It's a coded tense puzzle. And then I'm going to try and solve it for you, and we'll see how long that takes. And then you guys should be thinking, as you're watching me solve it, and you can have a go as well, obviously, about how long you think one of the top solvers in the world would take to solve this puzzle. So form an impression of that as we're doing the logic in your minds, and then we'll watch Ryotaro and we can see how close you were. Now, before we start though, I want to mention that I have uploaded the Junior Puzzle Hunt to Patreon. I hope actually by the time I upload this video I will also have uploaded the Adult Puzzle Hunt as well, that Mark and I have been working on these last few weeks. So the Junior Puzzle Hunt is one we've created ourselves. The adult one is created by Neil Talbot, our puzzle genius friend. They're free, they're not behind the paywall on Patreon. We wanted to release them because I think at this time with self-isolation going on, it will give you guys something to do that should be great fun. So I'm really looking forward to getting your feedback on those puzzle hunts. Now, how do coded tense puzzles work? Well, let's talk about tense puzzles. Let's talk about the basic puzzle first. This is a puzzle that's been around for a while, I would guess 25 years. I think it originated in the Netherlands, and has, as usual, quite a simple rule set, but it can be fiendishly complicated as well. So you can see that there are some trees in the grid, and the idea is that each tree must have a tent connected to it, but the tent must be connected in an orthogonal square. So if we take this tree as an example, it would be permissible for there to be a tent in this square, or this square, but not in the diagonally connected cells with the tree here. So that's what we have to do. Now, the only other rule is that tents are not allowed to touch each other, even diagonally. So if we found that this was a tent, then there couldn't be any tents in any of these positions. That's a very important thing to know. Now, what are these coded things on the side? Well, each of these letters represents a different number. Could include a 0 as well. And this is telling you how many tents appear in these rows. So you can see in this row there has to be C number of tents, whatever C turns out to be. In this one, A, and there's B's as well. And that's all there is to it. Now, as I say, the interface today is Japanese because we couldn't do it in the normal software, but you can play along. And what I've discovered in the course of playing around with this is that when this one is on, it allows you to click the mouse and make shadings. When this one is on, it allows you to draw little boundary things, and you can just sort of drag the mouse to create boundaries. And in tense puzzles, boundaries are important because sometimes particular squares can't be reached by particular trees, if you like. So let me try and pick an example here. Yeah, this tree here could not have a tent in this square, because if it does, this tree here, wherever it puts its tent, it will be connected with the tree that's in this cell. So we could actually draw that in as a first step. So we're going to solve this now. I hope it won't take too long, but I will try and do it extremely logically, and then we will look at Ryotaro Chiba's solve. And believe me, you are in for some treat, and probably your jaw will drop to the floor as well. So how would we do this? Now, the first thing I like to do with tense puzzles is to, and this is just me being a bit sad, I like to highlight all of the cells that can't be trees, can't be tents. So you can see that we can pick a few of these off immediately. You're basically looking for cells that are on diagonals with trees. Oops, not that one, but this one can't be a tent. I think we're running out of opportunities now. It looks like every other cell, I think that one can't be. So I think every other cell could conceivably be a tent. So what would we do now? Next thing I would do is I would switch to this notation, and I would start picking off cells, or picking off directions that trees couldn't have their tent in. So if we look at this tree here, if its tent was vertical, this tree would have nowhere to put a tent, so we can highlight that one. Similarly, if this tree had a tent here, this tree would have nowhere to put its tent, so we can highlight. I can do that one as well for the same reason as this one. So actually doing that, we can highlight this square in green, look. 1 second while I try and spot other easy opportunities to make progress. Well, let's look at this one. If this tree's tent was here, this tree couldn't have anything, couldn't have a valid tent, so we know that must do this. And actually, if this tree comes downwards, let's look at that. If this tree had a tent there, then this tree would have to have its tent here, and now this tree has nowhere to put its tent. Whether it puts it here or here, it's going to be connected with one of the black squares. So we can therefore say that this tree here cannot have a tent below it. So I don't feel like I'm making very good progress actually doing this. It seems to be not getting me very far. Actually, this tree, look, this tree can't have. Yeah, let's look at that. If this tree had a tent here, what's going to happen is that this tree has to have a tent here, this tree has to have a tent here, and now this one has nowhere to put its tent. So again, we could use that fact to say this square must in fact be green, because this is the only tree obviously that could reach this cell. Now if we look at the B row, you can see that it's only possible for there to be one tent in any sort of 2x1 rectangle, because a second tent would touch the other one axiomatically. So B must be 2 or 1 now, or this could be 0, I suppose. Oh no, B can't be 0 because this tree must put a tent in the B row. So B is not 0, B is 1 or 2. In fact, maybe we should work with the codes a bit more now. Let me just think about that for a second. Yeah, okay, there is something I should have spotted immediately, which is this. If we think about a 2x2 region in one of these puzzles and ask ourselves how many tents can be in a 2x2 region, it's exactly 1. It's a bit like a star battle puzzle. So in this little 2x2 region, there must be exactly 1 tent as a maximum. So one there, then there could be another one there, that's 2, another one here, that's 3, another one here, that's 4, and another one here, so that's 5. So in any 2 rows of the grid, there are a maximum of 5 tenths. Now, that means that C, as a clue, cannot be 3. Because if it's 3, because these are adjacent to each other, there would have to be 6 tenths in these 2 rows, and we know that's impossible. So C must be 2, 1, or 0. And can we rule out... Well, no, it can't be 0, because this tent must contribute at least 1 tenth. This tree must contribute at least 1 tenth to these 2 rows. So C is not 0. C is 1 or 2. B is 1 or 2. So A can't be 1 or 2. A must be 0, 3, or 4. Now let's see if we can work out which of those is... now A can't be 0 because of this tree. So A is 3 or 4. Now, is it possible for A to be 4? If A is 4 and we look at this row, that's not going to work because there would have to be one here. There would have to be one in one of these 2, one in one of these 2, and one here. And then the C row couldn't have any tenths in it at all. And we know the C row must have 1 or 2 tenths in it. So A is 3. Goodness, okay. So it's quite interesting this, isn't it? So A is 3, B is 1 or 2, C is 1 or 2. Now, let's have a think about that. So now we could do something like this. We could look at the B row and we could try... You can see that if B is 2, there would be 1 tenth in one of these 2 squares and 1 tenth in one of these 2 squares. In other words, in this row below that, there couldn't be a tenth in any of those positions. Now that, because we're hypothesizing B is 2, that would mean there would be a tenth in this square and one of these 2 squares, which would mean in the A row there couldn't be any tenths in those positions, and that breaks the A row. We know A is 3 and there's no longer 3 tenth possibilities. We could put one here and one here, but we can't get a third tenth in the row. So A is 3, B is 1, C is 2. Wow, okay, not easy. Not easy for me at least. So, does B equaling 1 help? Yes, it does. Because if B equals 1, this tree here is the 1. Therefore, there can't be a tenth here or here in this row. Okay, so now what do we know next about this? So now, just trying to see if there's an easy way to do the logic here. Yes, okay, now let's look at this tree. Where can its tenth be? Now if its tenth was here, this tree would have to have its tenth there, and that breaks the B row. We know there's only 1 tenth in the B row, and that would a tenth here would force 2. So we can remove that as a possibility. This square must be green. Same thing is true of this tree. Look, if this tree puts its tenth there, this tree will have to have its tenth there, and that will also break the B row. So we can say that's not true. Now that's really helpful, because if this tree here can't go downwards, it must go upwards. So that is now forced, and that's going to allow us to do a little bit of yeah, a little bit more. So this tree is attached to this tent, so this tree needs a tent. It's going to have to be here, which means this tree must have its tent vertical, and we get to put in a lot of green squares off the back of that. Look, now we can't now have a tent here, because this tree would have no valid tent position, so that becomes a green square. The C row here needs 2 tents, so this must be one of them. Now this square here now can't have a tent. Well, we can say this square can't be it can't be a tent, because this tree would then have no possible tent. So this forces that one up. Look, that gives us our 2 tents in row C. This must be tent. This is the 1 tent in the B row. We've got 3 in the A row, 2 here. That one we can fill in. This must be the 2nd tent in this C row. And very often with these puzzles, you find when you finally sort of get the logic sorted, you can fill them in quite quickly. I can fill in this B row now. There's only 1 tent in it. This needs a tent. It's got to be there. This needs a tent. This can't be a tent now, or this has no options. The A row needs 3 tents, so that must be a tent, that must be a tent. This must come down, that finishes the B row off. That must come down, that must be a tent, that must be a tent. And that is the solution. So, I don't know how easy you found it if you tried the puzzle. You could see I did it very logically, but it took a while. Now, the next thing you see is going to be one of the world's greatest solvers and their thought process. Now, this is awesome, trust me. Okay, so we're about to start. I will have to pause very quickly here to update you on Ryotaro's first thought process. So immediately he sees this grid. He says that his first impression was there are too many trees in this grid, and the grid is too small for the number of trees. And he immediately knew that the A, B and C letters were the numbers 1, 2 and 3. Now, why? Well, his rationale for this is that if one of the letters was a 0, it would mean that the rows with that letter are basically wasted. And since the grid was already, in his opinion, too small, this is very unlikely to be the case. He does this intuitively. It's not strictly logical. We did it strictly logically, but you can see some of the logic that took minutes for us is an instantaneous piece of intuition for Ryotaro. Now this is stunning to me. You know, it's also amusing. He instantly rejects the idea, even in a crowded grid, of any of the digits being 4, and that may be because he just has a very good handle on the 9x9 grid, and he knows that if there are 4 tents in a row, it's going to seriously restrict the adjoining rows. But anyway, that is his first thought process, and we haven't even done anything yet. So let's see what happens. You can see he's counting some stuff now. Okay, so the next point here is he described this as being between 6 and 10 seconds into the puzzle. So he knows one letter needs to be a 3, and he decides that this cannot be B or C. Why? Well, you can only place at most 5 tents in 2 rows of 9 cells, but B and C have 2 successive rows with the same label. And if these letters were 3, that would result in 6 tents in 2 rows, and that can't happen. Now that is all perfect logic. That took me rather longer than 6 to 10 seconds to find, on top of the fact that in those 10 seconds, Ryotaro has also deduced that A, B and C are the numbers 1, 2 and 3. I mean, we are dealing almost with a different species of puzzle solver here. This is quite exceptional. I'd be interested to know what you guys thought. how quickly you guys thought the winning time would be for this puzzle. You know, I don't know. I can tell you it's not going to be very long. He's already rubbing out as well. Now, he just said between 10 seconds and 43 seconds, he intuitively deduced that B can't be 2, because if B was 2, the bottom part of the grid would be too crowded. So he felt that A was 3, B was 1, and C was 2 by intuition. And he said his comment was, you can also do this logically, but it'll be much slower to do so, at least for me, which is him being extremely modest. You can see on the right hand side of the screen, we should just touch on this. I mean, on the right hand side of the screen is the guy who I consider to be the fastest puzzle solver I have ever seen, Ken Endo. I mean, there are some fabulous puzzle solvers out there, so maybe I'm doing other puzzle solvers a disservice, but Ken is quite staggeringly quick. And let's just talk about Ryotaro's next piece of logic now. So he says at 43 seconds to 1 minute 2 seconds, having remembered that the trees were too crowded, the tents in rows 2 through 8 were placed, in his opinion, a bit sparsely. So he started to think about how many tents there could be in row 1 and row 9. Now that's something I never even thought to do, but I can see that it would be a sensible thing to do. So he counts the number of trees in the grid, and I think there are 18, and he counts the number of tents there need to be in rows 2 through 8 on the assumption that A, B, and C are the numbers 1, 2, and 3 in the order he's decided, and I think he gets 13 from that sum. So he knows there are 5 tents now that he has to place in row 1 and row 9. Let's continue. I mean, it must be incredibly daunting to go head-to-head against Ken Endo. That must be an absolute... I mean, that is the stuff nightmares are made of. Oh, a bit of rubbing out there. Now, I think what's happened here... Let me just have a look. Yeah, he's done some rubbing out there. Oh, in fact, he's finished, so I've done him a disservice. Well, let me explain what happened in the last 10 seconds of that solve there. You saw there was suddenly a flurry of activity. So he's worked this thing out about the 5 tents needing to be in row 1 and row 9. And he's also seen that you can place at most 2 tents in row 1 because there's a big gap in the grid. You can see that if you look at Ken Endo's grid there. You can see in row 2 there's actually no tents, no trees at all. And therefore the maximum number of tents you could have in row 1 have to be delivered by the trees in row 1, and there are 2 trees in row 1. So he knows at this point that he can bifurcate the puzzle. So Ryotaro's view is that he knows that either row 1 has 2 tents or row 9 has 4 tents, because he knows there are 5 in the combination. So he says he took a chance and decided that row 9 may have 4 tents. Why did he make such a blind guess? Well, first, the puzzle type. If you revealed all the numbers in a coded tents puzzle, you'd get a substantially easier tents puzzle. This means if your guess that row 9 is 4 failed, you wouldn't get much disadvantage since you're just solving 2 easy tents puzzles, one of which doesn't have a solution. True. Second, his opponent. He's racing against Ken Endo, who he describes as much faster than him. Now that is something else. He says, and this means that he has a higher percentage chance of winning if he takes a 50-50 guess. And wow, so he uses the last few seconds to basically steam through and finish the puzzle first. And he says he's definitely made the right decision. He finished the puzzle in 1 minute 47 seconds, and Ken finished just 18 seconds later. So had he not made that guess, Ryotaro thinks that Ken would have pipped him. Now, this, as you've probably gathered, I mean, it's an absolute privilege to be able to see these guys competing like this. You'll see Ken finish well, it must be 18 seconds later. It's quite hard to see the pencil marking, but you know, to get the insight of what literally one of the world's very best puzzle solvers, in terms of how they were thinking about solving in a live environment like this. I mean, this is the sort of thing that makes my day. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and yeah, come back next time, tomorrow indeed, for more Cracking the Cryptic.